On trip that Henry and I were making right at the start when we were setting up this program, the IMPM, I was flying into India and saw this picture or something like it in one of the airline magazines, which we used to have in those days. And I thought it was such a brilliant metaphor for how we too often think about organizations and organizational life. And this is actually the same script that was in the advert. And it's so true, isn't it, that often the approach in thinking about organizations, about business, about management, is as if it's made up of a number of different sort of segments to be cut up and studied. If you're doing an MBA, it would be, I don't know, finance, operations, supply chain, people, and a whole bunch of different topics. But when you're actually managing something, you've got a live, holistic creature, the organization and you and all the people in it. It's a whole system, in fact. And what we wanted to do with the IMPM was to try to approach the job of managing as the job of holding, guiding, steering, something more like a living creature than a carcass. And that really underpinned the design challenge we set ourselves, as a result of which we came up with the 5 minds. And I think Henry is now going to take us through those in a little more detail.
Yeah, Henry, do you want to talk about this particular diagram?
Yeah, the thought of it is that all managing happens between action on the ground and reflection in the abstract. So you've got and weak management goes one way or the other. So some management is all reflective or all abstract or all numbers or all technocracy, and other managing is all action and no thought. So some kind of balance between action and thought is considered to be a sensible way of managing. And then we do that on 3 levels. We do it on a relationship level, collaboration. We do it on an organizational level, more analytical, and we do it on a contextual level, which we call worldly. I'm not sure where this came from. I know Jonathan and I had conversations way back before the program started. We certainly didn't want to build a program on business functions. We wanted to create a management program, not a business administration program. And so it didn't make sense to the functions don't describe managing. They describe what organizations do and what business managers have to worry about, but they didn't describe managing. I think some of the origins probably go back to my doctoral thesis, and the step between that and the discussions with Jonathan are completely vague in my mind. But somehow we put these things together, and it's worked really well and been copied in a lot of different places, actually.
Thank you, Henry. So just in summary, for those of you who haven't been exposed to these 5 managerial mindsets before, the reflective mindset is about managing self, which emphasizes the importance of reflection and thinking before acting. It encourages a thoughtful approach to management, prioritizing understanding and insight over immediate action. The analytic mindset is about managing organizations. So how do you take data or information and make the right decisions from that data? So it's focused on logical thinking and analysis, the use of data models and structured approaches to understand problems and make decisions, and a way to break down complex issues into more manageable parts. The worldly mindset is about managing context. So it's not necessarily about being global, it's about being open-minded, emphasizes the importance of understanding and engaging with the world outside the organization, whether that's culturally or otherwise. So it's about being open to new experiences and diverse perspectives, and it values cultural awareness and the strength of equity, diversity, and inclusion in how to manage in sort of a worldly context. The collaborative mindset is about managing relationships. So building strong relationships is key to organizational success. And that doesn't just include your stakeholders and your partners and your employees, but also collaboration with artificial intelligence, collaboration with nature. And the action mindset is about managing change. So this is about focus on execution and results, but and being proactive and decisive, but also managing change. So understanding that change has everything change is constant, and that this impacts people in the organization, and you also need to manage that change within the organization and make sure people are on board and are driven with you through that change. So that's just a little introduction to the 5 managerial mindsets. I'm going to pass it off to David now, and I'll let David start with some questions for Professor Mintzberg and Professor Gosling. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Ron. It's really wonderful to be here, and it's great to be reacquainted with Henry and Jonathan. So I've got about 20 minutes with them all alone, and I'm going to ask some questions, and then we'll turn it over to the broader group, and Ron can go back to being moderator. So I was on the very first INPM program, and way back then it felt very real to me, very ahead of its time, very unique. And I think it still is in many ways. And I'm going to ask Jonathan and Henry to speak to that in a minute. So just a little bit of background on my personal experience with this, because I was asked to talk about that. I remember when I was first approached by the CHRO of Royal Bank, where I was working at that time. And she said, we have this wonderful program we want to go on, and it's an amazing opportunity for you to be an even better leader. And I was in the middle of a transition at the point in time, and I just said, yeah, I'd love to, but I really don't think it's a good use of my time right now. And her response was, David, just say thank you. And so I did, and I'm so glad I did, because it had a really profound impact on me and my subsequent career at the bank and at other places that I've been since then. So it was really interesting. I was moving households about a year ago, and I came upon some of my INPM papers, and I was just astounded at the ground covered. And I really wished I'd been a better student to have absorbed it all, but the portion that I did absorb was really highly impactful. So let's just go to the first question, Jonathan and Henry. From what you can see of the landscape in global executive education today, how is INPM still highly differentiated?
Henry, would you like to start? You go first.
I would think utterly. Now, I'd have to go and visit every single program, and I know a lot of the things we've talked about or done have been copied. I'm not sure I've come across many programs other than the direct spin-offs we have in healthcare and EMBA locally and so on, and in other partner schools. I'm not sure anybody kind of gets it totally. The thing that's always shocked me over the years is Wharton, for year after year after year, and I haven't looked lately, but I'll bet it's still there, boasts on its website that in their EMBA, you don't get shortchanged. You get everything you get in Wharton's famous MBA. In other words, they're boasting that they take people with maybe 10 years of experience, a little less than us, but still management experience. And they're boasting that they do no more for them than MBAs do for people who've never managed a day in their lives. So again, I'd have to go around the world and look at a lot of programs, but my guess is there hasn't been a groundswell toward this kind of program. Somebody has their mute off, and we keep getting, if I don't know if there's a way to trace it or cut off all the mutes.
Yeah, Minjin can find them and put them on mute.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyway, that's so I'm not sure that the message, the sub messages have gone out, like the mindsets particularly. Whether there are comparable programs, I don't know, maybe Jonathan has a better take on
Yeah, I think that certainly the idea that your different ways of thinking about things has and that managing inevitably involves more than just mobilizing a number of different skills, but it involves actually approaching your work differently. I think that argument has had a huge impact, and we can see it more generally in, for example, there's been an initiative thinking about how to increase the operationalization of the Sustainable Development Goals, how to help people get active on the SDGs, because simply going about it as a set of projects or a set of sort of objectives or organizational targets has not been effective. And a bunch of people have developed the inner development goals, and there are 5 of them, and they match almost word for word the 5 minds that we set out. If anyone wants to Google inner development goals, you'll see. And so I think this idea of that it's the way you orient yourself has just been hugely impactful.
Just to interrupt on one thing, I don't think that's coincidental, by the way. I've had contact with people there. It looks like they did pick it up.
Yeah, and I think another thing, if David, to respond to it, is that we really made full use of this idea of mindsets as a way of helping us to design the learning engagements, so that our intention in designing a module on in the reflective mindset or in the action mindset was to do a kind of whole person engagement in that mindset. So we weren't going to sit people lined up in a classroom and tell them about taking action. We try to embody an action mindset. Get on and do it. Try it. See what works. Think about it. Try again. In the actual design and running of that part of the program, and similarly with reflectiveness, worldliness, and so on. And I think that holistic learning design has been picked up in some places more in companies, I think, than in business schools, because business schools are so invested in a kind of passive learner sort of structure and process that it's really difficult for them to change. One of the many examples of Henry's own organizational genius was when we were setting up the IMPM and finding it very difficult to get an agreement between the 2 schools we were trying to coordinate, INSEAD and McGill at the beginning. And I said, "Oh, this is just too complicated." And Henry paused for a moment and said, "You know what? It's not complicated enough. If we have 5 mindsets and 5 schools, that's just going to be too difficult for all the committees and accreditation systems in the universities to bother to keep control of. They'll just let us get on with it." And he was exactly right. It created a space for us to innovate.
I love that. And I love the concept of a whole person approach. And just to borrow from your earlier slide about this is not a cow, the way I've approached this in my work life is it's almost like a set of spinning plates. So each of the mindsets have to keep spinning at some point in time. But there are times where you'll do a deeper dive on 1 or 2 of those things in terms of what matters most at that moment. And I found for me in my career, the most valuable application of this was in transitions when I was moving from one job into another. And that's where the reflective mindset and also the worldly mindset really kicked in for me. Is that a good way to think about that, Henry?
Yes. Yeah, I think it becomes your sort of what's in your suitcase as you're ready to go from one place to another. David, I just wanted to mention a couple of things, picking up on Jonathan first. In my new book, Understanding Organizations, I talk about design doing. Design thinking has become a very popular concept. I think it's an unfortunate concept in a way, and I've had contact with Tim Brown at EDO, who I think came up with this, who kind of agrees with me that what they really mean is design doing. You act in order to think, and it talks to the relationship between reflection and action. We assume you reflect in order to act, but we also act in order to reflect. And one other point I just wanted to mention, INSEAD back then wanted an affair more than a relationship. And so, which turned out to be a kind of an affair. So going to 5, I was at INSEAD and I figured, well, I was there sort of half time, and I thought, well, I'll just sort of work from the inside and we'll create a program together. And they weren't interested, and I gave up on it, and kind of even sketched out an email that I used to get my secretary to type back then, and I left it on the desk of my secretary to type up, saying, all right, I give up. And Gareth Dias, a wonderful guy at INSEAD, who just inadvertently was reading my email. He's not a sneaky guy at all. He just happened to notice. He said, oh, Henry, we can't do that. And made me understand that we have to kind of figure this out in a broader sense. And so I called Jonathan, who I knew, who had met at Lancaster, and said, do you think you might want to join in this group? And he said, I'll call you back in an hour, and did. And then I wrote to Hiro Atami, not knowing at that point he was the dean at Hitotsubashi, and he came back immediately. And then we visited India, and they came back quite quickly. And so we put it all together. The match of mindsets in schools, particularly at the beginning, was absolutely ideal. Lancaster, the Brits are much more reflective. The Japanese are much more collaborative. The Indians are much more worldly. It worked out kind of beautifully. But I kind of went past your question, David. Sorry.
No, I think you covered it in terms of that circularity of action and reflection. So I think that's great. Like, design thinking just seems to be a problem in the nomenclature. So I work with Tim quite a bit, actually, and I think your application or your perspective on design doing is exactly right. Jonathan, do you have any kind of perspective on this integrated whole approach and the ability to sort of be agile and moving from mindset to mindset?
Yes, I think so. Some people recognize, I wonder, David, if you recognize this from your time at the Royal Bank, but some organizations really emphasize the analytic, for example, analytic ability, and it's absolutely critical to the survival and flourishing of their business. Clearly, if you're running a bank, you've got to be analytically very capable. But that can become, it's like a muscle that's overused, causes a sort of lameness in some other parts of your managerial metaphorical body, and so I think that as someone who may have joined a company and been promoted for their analytic ability, as they go up the line, find that they just need to be more reflective in order to contribute to strategic discussions. They've got to be able to think about what really matters and reflect on what they're learning from the actual experience of it. And similarly, someone who's spent all their time in the staff in an organization doing lots of reflection about what's our strategy, what are our core competencies, where are we going, at some point we'll need to go out and run some operations, make something happen. And so I think it's and I think if you are in a leadership development or as well as in an educational role, you have to think about what are we trying to help our students or our staff, our colleagues, what are we trying to help them to develop? Well, one thing is, of course, knowledge and experience, more generally, their networks and all those things. But I think if you think about, well, look, somebody really needs to be, for example, more collaborative, and collaborative for some people comes naturally. They sort of just love to be with other people and helping them out all the time, maybe even to a fault. But for some others, it's a real developmental pathway, and very, very important for their ability to contribute to anything that works across silos or with partnerships with suppliers and customer groups and stakeholders. A collaborative mindset is absolutely critical. So so I think some roles do it. There was another question in the thing about whether some cultures are more inclined to one or another, and I think Henry might have a view on this, but I think our experience was really that working in Japan, that much more sophisticated thinking and activities or ways of organizing to strengthen the collaborative mindset is something that we really all learned a lot from. Whereas perhaps in North America, the tendency to action is more than in much of Europe.
And
Perhaps.
India with worldliness. India is worldliness personified. I mean, it may have global companies and global activities, but the whole idea of functioning in the Indian society is you've got to be worldly, you've got to be sophisticated and analytical at the same time. Just one quick addition, David. The term I've been using actually the last few days, because I write a lot about balanced society, is blended balance. Not balance like on a pendulum where it's back and forth, two separate things, but blended balance, where it's blended within this head that Ron is showing.
That really resonates with me, Henry. I think that's much better than my spinning plates analogy. And also just in my own personal experience, Jonathan, you know, I hear you about the analytical mindset. That was probably the one that I would default to before. And now what I've cultivated more and more successfully as I think I've evolved is the reflective mindset. And in fact, just some of the, you know, one moment that we had, I think it was in the Indian module where we were doing, no, it was Lancaster, where we were doing meditation. That was actually a breakthrough moment for me. And if I can point to one thing in my personal development, it's being able to cultivate that practice for 25 years now. It's just been incredible in terms of building concentration and awareness. So it's been great.
I remember that.
Yeah.
You bring it back.
It was magnificent. Yeah. So just maybe to round out the questions, I would love to know, we talked a little bit about how your thinking's evolved over the years as you had experience with this in terms of, you know, mindsets that might be cultivated across cultures or different roles. When you're looking ahead to what managers need for the next 10 years, say, what are you seeing in terms of which mindsets in particular need to be cultivated? And do you need to evolve the 5 mindsets at all to meet the needs of the future?
Should I? Okay, let me begin. I wrote a blog called "What is Dumbing Us Down?" And that points directly to the reflective mindset. And it wasn't a business piece, it was a piece about the world in general. Like, we are just doing unbelievably stupid things. I don't think Trump is so much a question of left and right. I just think it's a question of somebody who is so personally vile. What in the world is getting into our heads or is not getting into our heads? So we seem to be losing reflection. I would put that first. Lots of action, you know. What's his name? The Forbes had a contest for, you know, asking some people who were the best and worst CEOs of last year, and I got to vote, and I said I vote for Musk for both. The best in Tesla and the worst in Twitter. What makes smart people so stupid? He was very smart, incredibly smart in Tesla. What makes him so stupid in Twitter? So even just the value of the company, forgetting about all the rest of it. So we need to. There's something that's getting in the way. Maybe there's just too many binary bits all over the place. You know, I sit here and I can get a million messages and download 1,000 films without doing anything, and all that's swirling around me and everybody else. And maybe that's just doing something awful to us, but who knows?
Thanks, Henry. Jonathan?
Yeah. Well, I think there's, one might say that there are some specific mindsets that are particular to some companies, and maybe perhaps some countries or sectors at particular times. So, in the UK, there was a spate, and there has been in India as well, of deregulation and privatization. And at that time, you had a lot of public organizations, whole sectors, whole industries that were public sector entering into private or public corporations and entering a competitive world where they couldn't rely just on their own government as a single customer. And I think sometimes in those circumstances, it was sort of clear that a competitive mindset was a sort of perhaps a short-term necessity, something like that. So I think this idea of the mindset can be quite helpful in that ways. But I think it would be hard to say that the world is lacking in competitiveness at the moment. More the other way around. And what I think quite strongly is that the polarization that we're seeing and the sense of people living in echo chambers and talking and hearing to people like them, hearing from people like them, is something that can be countered by a worldly mindset. A worldly mindset really means making the effort to sort of understand, to be empathetic with, to experience something of how the world is from other people. I was having a conversation the other day with a bunch of people from North America and Canada, actually, and a bunch of people in Southern Africa. And the North Americans were really exercised by climate change and the effects of the forest fires that last year that caused so much damage and havoc and continue to do so. And the friends in South Africa, the colleagues were saying, yeah, I really get all that, but the effects of all of that have already leading to just a breakdown in law and order here. I mean, I do want to stop climate change or limit it, but really what I want is to be able to go out and go shopping safely at the moment. And it's not that these are different problems, but they're just different worlds people are living in, and none of them is right or wrong or better or more. But to kind of, once you appreciate and hear from people who are facing things so differently, it gives you immediately the opportunity for a systemic perspective of what's happening. And systems are so sort of marvelously sort of robust at preserving the existing inequalities and elites and so on. But without a systemic perspective and understanding, there's no chance of shifting them and taking wise action on that. So I think if you to put all these mindsets together and say, well, what are we going to use them for? I think it's got to be a more systemic appreciation, more systemically wise action.
Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense in the context of seeing the broader picture. So it's even a meta view on the 5 mindsets, if you will. But I work with, collaborate with a retired 4-star U.S. general who always says, I always fought the war I had, not the war I wanted to have. And that's reflective of, how do you see reality for what it is, and how do you be curious about the worldly mindset in all dimensions, whether it's how high the altitude is that you're looking at things, or how low down it might be, or how broad a scope it might be, or how grainy it might be, or high definition, but it's looking at things through so many different lenses to try and, capture what is as close to reality as we can ever get. So it makes sense. This was great, and I don't want to be overly selfish, so I know that we've got 20 minutes left, and Ron, if you're there, how about going to some of the questions in the chat, or calling on some of the folks in the audience?
Sure. I have one last question for you, David. I know you mentioned meditation and I guess reflection that comes with that. How else have you used the mindsets in your career since doing the IMPM program?
I think it's when I think about human potential, I think of 4 big drivers. So curiosity, the openness and interest in different perspectives, learning about yourself, positive change, insight. We can be curious about a lot of things, but we don't necessarily drive insight that has commercial value. Engagement with other humans. How does that grow and change over time? And then just kind of sheer grit. And I think I always had this sheer grit, and I think the insight was there. but maybe the curiosity was less broad in scope. And I think that that program really opened my eyes to that. And I've been really cultivating that. I've always been curious about, something in the interest of an outcome, but just broader cultivation of curiosity. That's where I've gone with that. And I'm grateful that I had that exposure.